Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying here till the sixth session of today. I know it has been very tiring, and there's a great competition in the room next door. So today we are here with distinguished speakers to discuss how we can navigate the skills revolution to ensure that it doesn't exacerbate the existing inequalities in our labor markets, but instead becomes a tool to improve the inclusivity and well-being of EU economies and societies. So today we have four distinguished speakers. One is joining us online because she has been sick, but she was still very kind enough to accept to be there today because she's also an integral part of the discussions. It is Montse Gomendio. She's a biologist by training, but today she's not here with her scientist hat. Instead, she's here as an education policy expert. Montse was the general secretary of Spanish Ministry of Education, and then she joined OECD as a deputy director uh, of education, if I remember correctly. And then she was also, from the start, in the formation of OECD Center for Skills. So we are very pleased to have her here. Recently, she also published on education policy, sharing her expertise in Spanish education reform and also in OECD in cooperation with governments. We also have Laurent Probst. He is a partner at PwC Luxembourg. He has been working for more than 2 decades with governments and international corporations on how to best utilize the opportunities, and of course, being so in close connection with governments and companies, it is inevitable to feel the pressure of skills shortage in the labor markets, and I think that interest grew over time. And he also authored a book on skilling. The book is called Upskilling, a 6-step approach to unlock an opportunity for all. In the book, they are describing best practices and proposing new solutions for the problem, and he will share his insights on this topic with us as well. Our third speaker is Monique Kesser. She is the head of social policy in OECD. She has been working in OECD, I think, for more than 2 decades. And before that, she was working in World Bank and IFO, Institute for Economic Research in München, if I remember correctly. And she has a PhD in public policy, and at OECD, her team is working on social protection, social indicators, pension, affordable housing, and family and LGBTQI plus rights. As far as I know, in OECD, she was also working on gender inequalities in employment, entrepreneurship and education, and we are really happy that we are having her here with us today. I think our last speaker does not really need much introduction. We have the Commissioner Nicholas Schmit with us today. He is the EU Commissioner for Employment and Social Rights since 2029. Before that, I think between 2013 and 18, he was the Minister of Labor, Employment, the Social and Solidarity Economy of Luxembourg, and since 2019, he is also part of the EU Parliament. And we are very happy to have him here today. Unfortunately, he has to leave early, so we have 30 minutes with him. We are going to make the most of it. So he will be kicking off the discussions, and then we will have a quick warm-up round of questions among ourselves. Then we will have ideally and hopefully 5 to 10 minutes for questions, and then we will say goodbye to him and continue discussions among ourselves. So Commissioner, please, the floor is yours for the next 5 to 10 minutes as you please. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here and to have this discussion. Unfortunately, I cannot share totally the exchanges because I will go to a big skills event to Poland because there are thousands of young people coming together to compete on skills and apprenticeships. So I think this is something, unfortunately, I have to leave tonight. Now, I think that first it's a very good opportunity to have this discussion on technology and especially AI and the future of work and what to do about. Now, I must say, the more I read about the impact of AI on the world of work the more I am personally confused, because there are different analyses and different approaches. There are those who announce the catastrophe in terms of job destruction. There are those who are much more optimistic, saying, well, there will be job destruction, there will be shifts in the labor market from one job to another, but there will be also job creation, by the way. So I would have a slight tendency to be on this side. But again, we are still in a very in some kind of fog where, for instance, one economist says this and the other one says that. So I would say that we have to be prepared anyway to a big change in our world of work. This is for sure. So having somebody from OECD close to me, I must say I appreciate very much your report, the employment report. I told it to Mr. Scarpetta also, because you have this balanced approach and you give the different arguments. And I think this is important. But again, we have first to be prepared for big changes. We are, and our AI is a disruptive technology. It's not just a smooth transition. It will be, in many areas, very disruptive. So also in the way how we work and how we have to train people in the workplaces. So this is for sure. Now, the second one is, I would say, do we have any choice? Can we just say, well, AI, we should keep our distance with the AI, we should not go into that direction? That would be the biggest mistake for Europe, because we are not perhaps in a leading edge on AI anyway. We see that the Americans are putting a lot of money in AI, a lot of investments in AI. The Chinese, not to talk about the Chinese, the culture linked to AI in China is obviously different from the one we have in Europe, and even I think a bit with the American ones. So I think Europe has to be really active, investing, training, skilling, researching on AI. We have seen, we had all the shock of ChatGPT coming from one day to another, being very successful in terms of people using it. Now, we should not perhaps overestimate that, but certainly that gave an important signal. Now, many companies, I think 75% of companies, they are looking, how can I adopt AI in my system, in my production system? This is, I think, important, because AI will be, this technology will be also decisive for the competitiveness of companies, but also for productivity. And this is, I think, the big issue we can be sure of, is AI will bring a productivity leap, which is in a way good, because productivity, in my way, is the best way how to have growth. And the question is, what do we do with these productivity gains? How do we distribute them? How do we use them? Will they just be shifted into the financial markets, or will we do something different and have a fair share of everybody on this productivity gains? So this is a political question. And this leads me to say, well, I think we have no choice. We have to promote, we have to work on AI, on the development, on the use of AI. We have to encourage companies. But at the same time, we have also to create the frameworks for a good use of AI. A good use means economically speaking, but also socially or in a public interest dimension use of AI. And that challenges, in a way, public or political authorities, because we have now to think what kind of framework do we need? Now, I know that some people say always Europe is not very good in innovation, they are not very good in research, they are just good in putting regulation. Well, I think we have to be better in innovation and development of these systems, but also our ideas on regulation are of importance. And we have seen that in the past with the famous RGTB. Now, this has established also as some kind of a norm. And I think this is the same thing for AI. And when we talk to the Americans, for instance, well, the feeling is that we cannot just leave AI like that, and we have to find the right regulation is there. By the way, there's another economist, Acemoglu, has depicted AI as a possible catastrophe for humankind because it says, well, this will take over and this is... So we have really to prevent this remark serious. We have to prevent this bad developments of AI. Now, what can we do in simple terms? Well, my colleague in another room, I think he will talk about what we have already done, because we have an AI Act, which is much more focused on the internal market, the AI, the good quality and protection of consumers, and the risks, because we have an approach based on risk assessment of AI, which is good. And what are the risks in the labor market? So the risk is, first, how many jobs will disappear and what solution? Second, what are the shifts and how can we re-educate or reskill people who will use AI and maybe will benefit from AI because their job will be improved, because some very routine activities will be taken over by these systems, and we can use these people for more important or more useful purposes. So this is a big shift. So this means also that we have to imagine a lot of skilling and how we give people the possibility to shift. So skills in that area is key, but also reskilling, upskilling, and we have a common past in that area. When I was minister, we worked together on this upskilling approach, and we see now, that was a few years ago, we see now that upskilling has become the key word. It is the new gold standard when we are talking about skills and upskilling. And this, I think, is a big challenge also with AI. The second thing is we always have to make sure, and that's the European approach, that AI or technology in general, but AI in particular, has to be human-centered. We have started to introduce that, by the way, in a directive, because the platform is functioning on AI technology. Without AI, there's no platform economy. And what we have insisted on is to say, well, at the end, always, first there has to be transparency. People have to know what kind of algorithm they have to do with, what kind of programming there is. And at the end, there has always to be a human dimension, a human contact when we are talking about labor market, about people being dismissed or being employed differently. We cannot just leave to the machines just the management of human resources. We have to keep a human dimension in this. So these are big challenges. By the way, I'm very grateful that you start with that. We will continue in November with a new conference organized by the DG Employment, which has exactly the same topic, AI and the future of work, And so we will continue. So you are launching this discussion, and I think it's very, very positive that you're launching this discussion and that we are, because time is short. We know that technological developments are very fast. When the first ChatGPT was launched, the new generations are much further already in terms of development. So very often politicians or regulators are far behind and at a very much slower pace when we discuss how we can create this framework, how we can decently regulate this without putting it into question, also in a global context of competition with other parts of the world. I stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for summarizing your thoughts on the evolutions of the labor markets and how the Commission is responding to this changing and mitigating the potential negative impacts on the well-being of EU
but also
citizens.
The positive ones.
Of course, always. So when Mr. Schmidt appointed to the office in December 2019, I think one of the things that was on his agenda was to strengthen the social dimension of the EU policies. And I think in almost like in 3 months, 4 months, he got tested big time with the COVID shock. And then with the energy crisis, war, digital transformation, with green transformation. So it has been a challenging term for you, but I would like to say that I think Europe did great compared to the rest of the world especially. So recently in July, I think it was the end of July, the Commission published its report on the developments in the labor market in 2022. And there we see that despite this huge shock that hit us in the first quarter of 22, the EU labor market did greatly overcome this shock, and the employment reached its highest in history with like 74.6% employment rate, which accounts to 213 million people employed. And so in every aspect, we lowered the unemployment rates. So it was a great success. But despite that, the level of employment today is still below our 2030 targets. So the 2030 target for EU employment is 78%. So the gap is around 3.4 percentage points. So it might seem a bit little, but when you put it into numbers, it means 10 million people, 10 million new employment, and it is probably the population of the whole Belgium. So there is still a big challenge ahead, and in the report, the Commission also addresses few potential ways why and there is also another big problem of the EU labor market. It is continuous problem, I would say, is the labor and skill shortages. So this has been in the agenda for at least 2017 actively, but it has been acknowledged in early 2000s. So we did a lot of improvement, but I think there's still a quite improvements we need to be making. So when we check the numbers, we see that job vacancy rate is now 2.9%. It is the highest ever, and it means that there are 3 vacant positions for every 100 jobs in the EU labor market. So this also has huge cross-country variation. In some countries, it's even higher. So when we check the performance in the last 10 years, we see that the skill shortages tripled in manufacturing and construction. It doubled in service sector, and with the changes in the digital transformation and green transition and the changes in the skill demand will only exacerbate this problem. So this is why we want to invest today in the discussion how we can close this skill gap and improve our responsiveness and, as a return, the well-being of EU workforce. So one of the things that is signaled out as causes of this skill gap, the skill shortages, is low participation, especially low participation of women, young people, people with disabilities, and people who are coming from, have low educational attainment. So the Commission proposes multiple measures to address this. These are like upskilling, reskilling, and investing in adult education, along with increasing the incentives to work and improving the working conditions, of course, and pay raises, and also lowering the barriers to labor markets. So today we will delve into how we can improve the labor force participation of these disadvantaged groups and how we can use the opportunities brought by skills revolution to engage them better in the labor market, because data shows that actually people who need training the most are either have low access to these opportunities or are not really engaged. So this, unfortunately, the data at EU level is a bit old, but I know PwC had a recent survey in 2023 on global workforce and hopes and fears about the recent state of the labor market. I would like to ask Mr. Prost to give some insights from the survey results and ideally give us also some information about how it evolved since the first wave in 2019, because we know it has the willingness to participate in training, upskill, reskill was rather low in 2015-16, but after that, everything changed drastically, and the new numbers we are going to have only in 2024. So maybe the survey will give us some insights already.
Thank you. So, in our last survey with of the 54,000 workers interviewed globally and 15,000 for Europe, we have seen a huge appetite for upskilling. And if you look back at the previous years, since 2019, we see, I would say, the same level of appetite. Today, for this year, it's about 75% of workers who are keen to learn new skills. And it was 79% in 2020, something like this. So we are on the same trend, a high demand of workers, employees to be upskilled. We have about 36% of workers think that their skills will change significantly in the next 5 years. But this, for Europe, this figure is lower, much lower than Asia Pac and much lower than in the US. So here in Europe, we are a little bit less concerned, or people are a little bit more comfortable, I would say, regarding this change of skills pattern for their job. And another point which is also very important is the fact that 52% of the CEOs see labor skills shortage as a major risk for their profitability. And in the last discussion in the other room, we heard that the CEO of E.ON said that he is missing 30% of the workforce to install, to connect all the panels, renewable energy in the near future, in the midterm plan. We also ask the workers about the AI revolution. What does it mean? And it will change the nature of the demand, but will not remove it. Meaning that workers cite the positive impact of AI more frequently than the negative. They see 30%, 31% said AI will help them to increase their productivity. So the situation is mixed. It's not black or white. And I think that this is a very important point to continue working at it. But we see 3 or 4 major problems there. As you mentioned, people who have the lowest level of skills or specializations are the least, I would say, concern or the least for upskilling. Okay, that's number one. The new thing in the survey this year is that we see that people who have a problem to pay the bill at the end of the month are not also open for upskilling, or less open for upskilling than others. And we see clearly that the people who are the most keen to upskill are the people who have a very strong specialization, skill specializations. Okay, because they clearly, so that's the point. And if you think a little bit about it, if you think about the people who are just not keen to upskill, they also belong to companies, mainly SMEs, who for those, it's very difficult to find a very concrete upskilling plan. They have to go through their trade associations, they have to go through a national plan or regional plan. They need to find the right time for the workers, really they have to give time for workers to upskill. It's very complex to manage with the clients and so on. So we have, in Europe, we have a big challenge with SMEs. How do we fix this upskilling plan for SMEs?
Thank you, Laura. So you are actually right. What we see in the data is also confirming your observations. So the cost of the training is one of the major barriers to training for almost everyone. So this is why I think the EU level initiatives like the promotion of individual learning accounts is a very valuable policy tool. But before continuing with my second question, I would like to remind our online audience that they can actually join the conversation using Slido, slide.do, and are using the hashtag labor. So please interact with our speakers there as well. So what we see actually that you mentioned that only 36% of the labor force is anticipating that they will need to reskill and upskill.
36, yeah,
36. And the World Economic Forum recent estimate is around 44% of the jobs as the skill component is going to change. And the numbers are, the acknowledgement in EU is even lower. So I assume there's a huge amount of people who are going to be surprised in the near future. So, and here I would like to go to Mrs. Gomendio and ask her experience in adult education, because we know most of the training happens in the workplace, and our current adult education systems are not really well equipped to deliver the needs of the labor market. So given your experience in education policy at OECD and also in Spanish government, what would you address as the reason why people are not really engaging in training, although they sort of anticipate the need for it, and there's an obvious need for it in the labor market?
Thank you very much. So I would start by saying that, as has already been suggested, there's a lot of variation. So the problem is that people who already have high levels of skills are much more likely to continue looking for ways to upskill and reskill, while people who have low levels of skills are very unlikely to do so. And the difference is huge. So for people with high levels of skills, about 60% of them are actually upskilling and reskilling through very different means. Either they go back to university, or it's on-the-job training, or it's online courses. While if you look at the people with low levels of skills, who are those most in need of upskilling and reskilling, and whose jobs are most at risk of being automated, or at least experience a very profound transformation, you find that only 20% of them are upskilling or reskilling. So this 20% in Europe, according to Cedefop estimates, it's around 128 million people. So we are talking about a lot of people with low levels of skills that are at risk. But this group is very heterogeneous. So the problem is that the solution to the low-skilled group cannot be just a uniform solution to all of them. So in most countries, older people have lower levels of skills than younger people, because they had education for a fewer number of years, or the education system was of lower quality. For whatever reason, this is rather universal in most European countries. But then there are more specific issues to certain countries. So in some countries, like mine, like Spain, there are very high rates of early school leaving, and therefore there are a lot of young people with very low levels of skills too. In many countries, a large proportion of the immigrant population has low levels of skills, and then the solution that can be applied to these very different groups, all of which share the problem that they have low skills, are different. As you said, there are many barriers. The main ones seem to be financial. So there are many financial incentives that can be given to individuals, such as paid leave in order to train, or bursaries and government funding, public funding, in order for people to get on-the-job training or to enroll in vet courses. I mean, depending on what has been developed in different countries, the solution for them might be one or the other. But there's also another barrier, which is about time. Low-skilled people normally don't have, particularly older people, don't have the time to engage in upskilling and reskilling, particularly if this means going outside their working hours, because they have family commitments and other commitments. And then there's another barrier, which I think it's often overlooked, which is lack of information. I mean, very often low-skilled people are unaware of the need to upskill and reskill. And even if they are, they lack the information about what are the opportunities that they have. And perhaps more importantly, they lack information about what are the best options for their specific situation. So I think here it's very important to find a way to coordinate the public and the private sectors within government, to coordinate different layers of government and different ministries, so that all this information is available and transparent, and so that coordinated efforts are made so that this very large group of low-skilled people that are most at risk can find ways to upskill and reskill and either improve in their employment conditions or go back to the labor market if they are unemployed.
Unfortunately, I have to leave.
And
But could I just make a brief comment on this? I
Please.
fully agree. And this is the question, because it's a question also of mindset, and especially of those who are the lower skilled people. Because we have found out that, especially when you tell people you have to be reskilled, they associate reskilling very often with losing their jobs. Because their job is under pressure. So if they tell me I have to be reskilled, finally this means I lose my job. And I think this is something we have to change. And we have to show that being reskilled is not lose your job, it's keeping your job, improved job, or eventually getting a new one. And that's the whole model we are working on, how we can organize better transitions on the labor market. Because reskilling or upskilling should finally, especially in the context of labor shortages we are in now, and probably for different reasons, including demographic ones we will stay in some way, should give people the confidence that being reskilled, they will keep a job or be given even a better job. Just to make one remark, I read an article by David Autor recently where he had a very interesting approach saying, well, perhaps it's the lower skilled who can gain from artificial intelligence, but under the condition that we manage to reskill them, because they will increase their productivity and perhaps they will be given better jobs and better paid jobs. So this is the optimistic thing, but this shows how central, how key, finally, upskilling and reskilling is for the future and in this period of major changes and transformations in the labor market. So
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to...
I would like to
would have liked to listen to you, but
quickly add something there.
otherwise...
In Luxembourg, we see when we check the data, despite being low educated, there's a huge group of people who are doing coding. I think that is a standalone proof itself that policies at a very local level has aggregated visible impacts in the well-being of people. So thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank
so
you.
please join me
Sorry.
to
Really,
thank
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Schmidt
Next time.
for his participation and have a nice flight. So we will continue our discussions with our speakers. So I have a question for Mr. Kessier. She is working in OECD, although she is working in social policy. I would like to start asking her OECD's research on existing initiatives at the global level which have been proven to be successful to meet the labor market needs, because we have heard that financing of training is one of the biggest issues, and currently companies are the main sponsor of these trainings. But this actually exacerbates the inequalities, because when the company provides the training, it is mostly towards the more better investment, so where the returns to training is higher, and that's obviously the high-skilled people already. So to overcome this widening inequality, so I think the role of governments needs to be bigger, and the role of social policy has to be more prominent. So I wanted to ask you whether you could give us some examples of successful policy implementations where the skill development allowances or career guidance was actually impactful on the overall improvement of the conditions in the labor market.
So yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think it's fair to say that a lot is happening in different countries. We see, in particular in European countries, that there is much more contact now between employers and the public employment services to kind of figure out that the employers can come to the public employment service with a much more specialized and detailed request for what they need. And for example, in France, very interesting model, the Public Employment Service has now agreed with the employers to no longer ask for, or primarily for the qualifications, which is the usual way that you frame a demand, that you say, okay, we need somebody to have this and this type of degree or bachelor's or technical qualification, but to say instead we're looking for certain skills, which makes it easier and lowers the barrier for people to apply, because they say, yes, I might be able to do this, but even if I don't have this university degree in this specific thing, as you were mentioning, coding can happen, learning how to code can happen in many forms. It's not necessarily going to a formal education and getting a certificate, but you can learn many of these things in other ways on the job and so on. So that's the first thing. But then there's two examples which are particularly interesting in Europe. They're both in European countries. One is in Finland, the other one is in Estonia, where we did an analysis of the Finnish system together with the European Commission, actually, that the Public Employment Service provides the possibility of what they call self-motivated study, which is subsidized with an unemployment benefit. So you continue to get your unemployment benefit, and you can do that up to 2 years while you enroll in full-time degree studies. And you don't have to, during that time, you don't have to meet any of the job search requirements that you usually have in order to keep your unemployment benefit. And then our evaluation showed that this measure had positive effects on the beneficiary's employment, and also it supported labor mobility. So you could see that after these people did their self-motivated study, that they were actually more likely to switch jobs and go into new job opportunities. So that's one. The second one is from Estonia, where the Public Employment Service enables unemployed and also not only people on unemployment benefit, but also people whose job is at risk. And then I think that's another very important factor to say that you don't only take into account people who are already in a situation where they lost their job, but if you identify areas, in particular low skilled, where you say these people are at risk, you do something about it, and they give them a benefit to take up degree studies, and it's not really an unemployment benefit in that case, but it's actually a study benefit. And but there's some conditions here. For example, that the qualification that people are getting through the study somehow has to be related to an area which is in high demand, and where their skills shortages have been identified, so that these people at risk of job loss can actually get that additional qualification. And then there's other smaller, these are the two most substantial examples that we were able to identify so far as a very positive way forward. But obviously, as you said before, it depends on who pays for these studies, because if you're in a country where university is free, it's much easier, obviously, because neither the employer nor the trainee has to cover those costs, but you can just show up and it's funded. So where it's largely private, or what you have been seeing in your survey, where the employers have to pay for it, obviously it's more complicated. And most of these other examples that exist are much smaller. So for example, Germany just did a labor market reform of their unemployment benefit, long-term unemployment benefit, which used to be called Hartz IV, which many people know was quite tough with a lot of job conditions and not very high. And they now, it has a new name, it's called Citizens Money, Bürgergeld, and which has fewer conditions attached, it's less strict, and they have an additional 150 euro benefit on top of it for people to pay for training. Now with 150 euros you're not going to get very far, I don't think, but in Germany...
In countries where the base of unemployed people are relatively small, like in Germany, where unemployment is lower than the EU average. So of course, this necessitates the close collaboration between private sector and the public resources, and that we know the needs of the private sector in terms of skills and vacant positions in which type of occupations and industries. So, Mr. Probst, I know you have earlier you mentioned that SMEs have relatively disadvantaged position in providing the skills and having access to the skills they need, mostly because of the resources they have. But we also see in the data that majority of the training is given by the bigger companies, and then this also has implications not only on productivity but also in tech adoption, and growth. So I was wondering whether there are other aspects from the private sector perspectives that we should be considering into account when developing these public-private collaborations and to enable an improved state for the private sector as well.
Yeah. I think here the key point is that we have analyzed many national upskilling plans or regional upskilling plans. The main problem with these upskilling plans is that they put more or less, it's one plan for all the population or addressing vulnerable people, that's fine. But here we have to understand that the training is ordered by the company. The training related to a job is ordered by the company, so it should fit the company strategy. And SMEs have really specific problems. You cannot compare SME HR policy or SME HR organization with a large corporate organization. Even large corporate organizations have big trouble today to do their workforce planning. Just with AI today, doing the workforce planning for big companies 20 months ahead, it's a nightmare. So can you imagine for SMEs how to do that? So in fact, here, what you are convinced that it's important to really focus on companies, and SMEs would be a group, and we can do some subgroupings, which really build an upskilling plan which address specific SMEs needs in relationship with trade associations, with local vocational trainings, helping them to improve the quality of these trainings and so on, and addressing also the pre-financing. Because the return on investment of upskilling is fine, is good for the state, for the employer, for the employee. There is a good return on investment. The main issue is the pre-financing. And it costs 2-3 months of upskilling for perhaps 2 months for a plumber, for instance, on a new machine or for a new system. But who is going to pre-finance? So we need also new financial instruments. For instance, we could imagine today a kind of a skills bond at EU level with a state guarantee, at least for the first loss. And then I think there were some experimentations in Finland also, I think some years ago, or in the UK. And I think we need this kind of new instruments to be able to pre-finance the population, the upskilling of the population for SMEs. Because they are representing 95-96% of the jobs in Europe. So we will not see any progress in employability in Europe if you don't upskill SMEs.
That's very true, actually. So the need for reskilling is higher in SMEs. Mostly they are employing a huge share of EU workforce, that's true. And they are also producing a considerable share of our GDP. So they are not really negligible side component of they are an integral part of the labor market. And actually, EU-level funds, like the training bonds you were suggesting, could be proven very powerful. I recall listening to a talk by Andrew McDowell. He's also working with you in Luxembourg, I guess. And before he was working at Irish government, so he was the chief economic advisor. And he was mentioning that how EU structural funds are used to build the skill pool in Ireland. And now today we see, like I think almost 2 decades later, that the Irish labor market is not severely suffering from the lack of ICT skills thanks to these funds. I think the optimized allocation of funds can really benefit in our economy in the next 1-2 decades. So I would like to have another question for Mrs. Gomendio regarding also her experience in OECD Center for Skills. So you were there when it started. Now it has been, I think, almost 6 years into it. Of course, a lot of things changed, and there are a lot of there is a new acknowledgement of the need between the collaboration between public and private sectors, and the alignment in the education level with the sector needs. So could you give us some good examples across the globe where we see the collaboration between public and private institutions in training level at this proves to be very fruitful for the economy?
Sure. So in most countries, when you look at adult learning systems, one of the problems that you find is that it's the responsibilities and the financing, it's very, very fragmented. So it has been mentioned that the Ministry of Employment has a big role, of course, in upskilling and reskilling the unemployed, but also the education system has a big role if people choose university or vocational education and training in order to upskill and reskill. And in many countries, because none of these routes were enough to upskill and reskill the large portion of the population that requires that, there are many private providers, and it's very difficult from a governance and a finance point of view in most countries to understand who's providing what's the level of quality, and to be able to give information to the people who need it so that they can make the best choices. So I would say that coordinating all the levels of government, different ministries like employment, education, economy, innovation, if that's the case. Also different layers of government, because many European countries are decentralized. So you find that most of these policies are implemented at the regional government. So there needs to be coordination also with regional governments, and then obviously the stakeholders, because as it has been mentioned, it's mainly the firms that do the on-the-job training. So in order to establish bodies that can coordinate all these different actors and help define ways of sharing the costs of funding this training and also implementing accountability mechanisms, it's a situation that has been solved in different ways in different countries. But I would say that a concept which is not always called skill council, that's the case, for example, in Norway, but there are similar bodies in many countries that have the same role, which is basically to bring together the different, at the vertical and the horizontal level, the different levels of government, the different stakeholders, in order to decide what the priorities are, how the funding is going to be shared between all of them, how the quality is going to be measured, and the accountability mechanisms that are going to be put in place. I would say that most of them work pretty well. Perhaps I would specifically point out SkillsNet in Ireland. It's coordinated by the government, but it's basically a network of businesses where they share good practices and they share their experiences and their needs, and they collaborate, and they also provide a lot of very useful information to the government about what are the skill needs for the future. This is very important, particularly as it was mentioned before, in countries which are most European countries, where there are many SMEs and where SMEs are particularly small, because the cost benefit for SMEs is such that the costs are very high and the benefits are low because of the risks of poaching. So if you get these companies to get organized into networks, this is what we did in Spain when we implemented an education reform where we developed a new form of dual vocational education and training, which also aimed to upskill and reskill adults. The problem with SMEs is they don't have enough people in order to have people that can help the people who need to be supervised and trained. They don't have the funding. And then if they do make the effort, then they have this very high risk that the people they train will be poached by others. But if they get organized into networks, then they share the costs, they share the training, and then they can all benefit from hiring those people that are trained. And the last thing that I would like to say is that although I think we all agree that on-the-job training is the best way to upskill and reskill. Things are changing so fast that there are also emerging skills where there are very few firms that can train people on those. And then again, public-private partnerships are very important so that new ways to train people into these emerging skills that are still not very usual in the labor market. They can train people on these. I mean, I would say renewable energies, for example, is an example where a lot of people are choosing vocational education and training courses, adults, in order to gain these skills that are very difficult to find in the labor market these days. And the last thing is, if we are thinking of upskilling and reskilling adults, taking a modular approach, whether they're using vet courses, whether it's on-the-job training, whether it's university, whichever route they're using, it has to be modular so that they can actually do it without having to leave their job or having to leave their family responsibilities or whatever constraints they may have. Because if we expect adults to give up all the other responsibilities for a year or two in order to get the training, that's very unlikely to happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Montse. I think this connects greatly the discussion, because so far we have been very focused on public sector and the private sector, but we miss the third leg of the equation, the civil society. There are many NGOs who are working in the field to upskill and reskill people, and they, given their structure, they are more flexible, they are more agile in responding to the need of the both labor force and also this industry itself. And usually they are smaller at scale, so they are able to address this extra resource, like for women to provide child care during their training. They have this kind of flexibility to address many aspects, many barriers at the same time. So I think that's a good connection to conclude our discussion. But before we conclude, I have one last question for you, Mr. Kesiar. So we have seen with COVID that how fast the EU social policy can address the problems. And I think we navigated it rather nicely, smoothly, but the challenges are not ending, and with the changing technology, the problems are also changing very quickly and beyond our imagination. So from our experience in the past 3 years, what would you say about the need to how the social policy should be adjusted, change in the coming years, so that we have the advantage of being the social society we have now, that we are enjoying in the future as well?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. There's actually a really interesting link between social policy and social protection experience and skills, I would say. Because when we talk about reskilling and upskilling, we're all focused at the moment on AI, we're focused on technological advances, we're focused on being worried about workers not being able to do their jobs anymore. What we're less focused on, and it's natural because of what's going on technologically, and it's very exciting, obviously. What we're not focused on so much is the old skills. And we've just done some very interesting work. Actually, Monse's old team at the OECD has done this work. And they looked at the effects of the EU Fit for 55 package on labor markets and the demand for skills. And they, of course, you can see that the demand for skills in the area of renewables and solar, wind, and so on, that's massively going to increase. But when you then look at the overall employment effects until 2030, what is needed, there's a lot of the traditional skills that we knew for a long time we needed, that because that part is massively increasing, but looking at the massive employment we need, the other parts are still really important. And from a social protection perspective, we know that there's 2 areas where we have now already massive shortages, and those are the 2 ends of care: childcare and elder care. And here, you just mentioned the COVID crisis. I mean, we put out a report which is called Beyond Applause. And we said, we're all there clapping our hands in Paris on the balconies. I'm sure Brussels did the same. And And then we kind of forgot about these people. And if you look at how much we're going to need in terms of care, how big the needs are, how we need to think about upskilling, yes, but we need to think about making those jobs more attractive, about having new job profiles for this, having career advancement possibilities. And the same thing, by the way, for early childhood education and care, where we have the same problem. Germany, for example, promised everybody a childcare place. They're having a really hard time giving that in high quality because there's not enough people around. So my plea would be, yes, it's important to focus on technology, AI, and all of that, but please do not let us forget about all of the other challenges that we're dealing with at the same time, which also have massive impact on labor and skills.
Thank you. That's, I think, a nice conclusion. But we have still a few more minutes for questions from the audience. I have some questions in Slido already. So maybe if you have a question, so my friends have the microphone, we can. Thank you. If you can introduce yourself also. So I think it's not working. But for the audience online, I think it's good.
Hello,
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Jacopo Lusetti, I'm from Italy. I would like to assess the problem about not employed and educational training people. We discussed about now upscaling, but many people are not incentivized to actually join back to the market for many problems. Especially it's a big problem from Italy, where we have like 20% of people from 18 to 29 that actually not working. So a fifth of the labor force is out of this. And I would like to know how can you incentivize people to go back to the market, and more on the top already funds European is available. And if you have any guidelines, because Italy has a problem also of how we invest the European funds. We have a problem that like for the funds called employment youth, we just invest 62%. So maybe the state is unable to invest at providing good services. So as a Europe or world system, how we can import these new tools to actually help the country as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's collect a few more questions also. So there also the lady in green.
Hello. I'm Ruth Passerman. I work at the European Commission on social policy. And actually, I had a comment on the idea that Mr. Prost made on the issue of, I don't know how you called it, skill bond or something like that. It's a very good idea. It is actually possible through the InvestEU, FC before and InvestEU to finance these kind of operations. InvestEU is a loan or equity or guarantee instrument, so it's not a grant, and it has a specific social and skills window. But the skills window is practically unutilized. Mm-hmm. That's why I wanted to. It is just there is no demand for this kind of instrument. So I just wanted the comment on this point.
Thank you for informing us for available resources that we can exploit, hopefully. So please.
Hello. I'm the Japan mission that you work in Brussels. So various times I communicate with the Japanese industrial company. So they want to invest to especially Eastern Europe country. So Japanese company, generally speaking, they're good at the job on-the-job training. The on-the-job training is kind of the training program. On the other hand, as you mentioned that the EU or each European government supplies a trainee program. But our side, including the Japanese private company, said that there are no connection with this program. So I think that if there the cooperation with this on-the-job training by the Japanese the industrial enterprises. So that we can contribute to the Eastern European European countries' activities. Yeah. How do you think that how is it cooperate with non-EU countries' activities?
Thank you. We have one last question in the front row, if we... And the first row, David, hang in there for a second. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I have a question related with gender gap and digitalization of the economy. I mean, looking at the figures of education, you see that women and girls go much less to technological degrees. I mean, even though they have the same capacity when they are very young, at the end they choose more other careers and other degrees different to technological ones. And then this may have it will have an effect on gender gap in general. And besides that, women in general hold more unskilled positions that are at risk of digitalization. So for both effects, it will have a negative effect on gender gap. And I was wondering if there is especially educational policy, any example of educational policy to tackle this problem, although with the sample that you said at the end that is at the same time that digitalization positions are much more demanded, there is also a higher demand of care, I mean, in care service positions that are usually held by women. So this will, they will lessen the negative effect on gender gap. But in the digitalization, I think it is clear that there is a negative gender gap on that. And my question is if there is any educational policy tackling this problem of so little women going to technological degrees.
Thank you. We will take the last question from David, and then maybe we can pick which questions you want to respond to, because I don't think we will have time to respond all.
Thank you very much for giving me the honor to pose the last question. I'm David, representing Generation, which is an employment nonprofit that prepares and places vulnerable people of all ages into jobs. And my question is actually pointing towards the leitmotif of this panel, which I'm glad it was. It's mid-career workers. The organization I represent conducted research on this topic, and particularly on what the challenges mid-career workers face when looking for employment. And we've actually found one of the shocking paradoxes is the age performance paradox, as we call it, which is that many employers are reluctant to hire older workers because they have misperceived conceptions about them. They're not going to learn fast enough, they're not digitally savvy. And my question to the panelists is, how do you think both companies and governments can, or what can governments and companies do to overcome ageism in the workplace, which is, I think, the main barrier to having more mid-career professionals thriving in different careers? Thank you.
Thank you. So we also have a question on Slido. We have three actually, but I will refer to one of them specifically. So it is an anonymous question. They are asking, have any countries implemented programs to direct workers in need of reskilling towards sectors where there's an acute labor shortage? So for example, care sector. So given the time constraint, I will ask you to respond one of the questions you would like to respond. Maybe we can start with you, Monica.
Okay, very quickly, the first question from Italy. We've done a lot of work on needs, so those not in education, employment, or training, and often it's a very complex set of issues. It's not only labor market issues, and now we see that, particularly post-COVID, that a lot of it is connected to mental health issues also. And this is not something that's related to Europe. We have our Japanese colleague here, hikikomori, is of course a big problem in Japan. Those are young people who are completely disengaged and do not leave their room anymore. So you will need a comprehensive package of different types of measures and they have to be quite tailored to each case. And this is where NGOs come in, of course, also, which are often much closer. But we're currently working on a toolkit for governments where we're collecting best practices for youth, to precisely for reintegration in the labor market, with a strong focus on those with lower skills where we're worried about. Then maybe the gender question I'll let Montse answer, because Montse has done a lot of work on STEM and is a good example of a STEM educated female professional herself. And then the last question was about the older workers.
Ageism, yeah.
Yeah, the ageism. We've done a lot of work on older workers. This is something and now we've very interestingly, we looked only at older workers and tried to explain that you're not trading jobs between younger and older workers, and that there's the lump of labor fallacy and all of these type of issues. Now we've gone a step further at the request of, very interestingly, the AARP, the largest NGO in the world, I think they are, that represent older workers' interests in the US. They've asked us to start working on how to manage the aged workforce and take a look at not only the older end, but how, as a company, you should be designing your overall age composition and what are the benefits of this. So you can go on our website, you'll find the first report on it. It's something that we're going deeper in, because we realize that only keeping repeating about how valuable older workers are, that alone is not going to do the job. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there.
So in Japan, this started in 80s, because they were already aging back then. So they were having special employment agencies for older people. Singapore as well. I think as the problem really emerges beyond a state that we can ignore it. So I think now ageism is also on the policy agenda. Maybe Montse, would you mind responding to the question on gender in STEM education?
Sure. I was hoping that Monica would do that, but anyway. So, I mean, I would say that there is still that difference where you see that many more men than women choose what we call, this is basically data from tertiary education, right? So it's basically men choosing degrees that we regard as more technological, such as in engineering. And that continues to be true, although the gap is getting smaller in some countries. But I would argue that there are certain, if we still remain in tertiary education, there are degrees that are chosen predominantly by women, like medicine, for example, that are becoming incredibly technological. So the gap between the traditional gap, which is what most people have in mind, you know, men choose engineer and females choose caring jobs like nursing. I think the divide between the two with technology becoming embedded to such an extent in so many jobs, it's no longer so clear cut. I would say that a lot of women in medicine are actually engineers that are dealing with developing new equipment and so on. So I don't think the divide between the two in tertiary education is all that clear cut. I would also argue that the gaps that we used to have, for example, with girls in school doing worse at maths than boys, those gaps have been overcome in most countries, and in those that haven't been overcome yet, they're in the process of doing so. So I would go back to something that Monica said in her first intervention, which is that employers are looking more and more at the skill sets that people have rather than the educational degrees that they have. They may be related or not, depending on the quality of the education system. And then it doesn't matter so much what you have chosen to study, because people more and more are using different ways of studying. So it's no longer just about your university degree or your last educational degree, whichever that may be, but it's also about online courses that you've taken, or short modular courses, MOOCs that you've taken, or things that you've experienced while having a work experience during the summer or whatever. So people are now learning in so many different ways that I think for employers is really very important to develop tools to assess the skills that people have in order to look for the right matches. And then I would just try to answer very quickly the question about incentives. What would be the right incentives for employers to hire older workers? Also the incentives for people to go where there are labor shortages. I think here the solution is basically to target those incentives to the population that you want to improve because they have greater difficulties, or to the sectors that have shortages. So any incentive that you put in place, you just make it greater for those for that part of the population or for those economic sectors.
Thank you, Montse. So we are already stealing time from the next session, but maybe Laurent, do you want to quickly address a question?
I can talk afterwards.
Okay,
one
so
to one.
yes, that would be better. Please join me thanking our speakers, and sorry that we took over time. So thank you for joining us.